Magic permeates J.R.R. Tolkien's world, but we rarely see it performed. By which I mean, Tolkien doesn't often show us Gandalf casting spells. Magic is, rather, innate to certain places and people. For instance, Rivendell and Lothlorien are saturated with magical power, and such characters as Elrond, Galadriel, and even the Balrog and Moria are obviously magical beings. But as far as how magic works, well, Tolkien is quite vague on that matter. But he does offer us some interesting hints on how it works here and there. Now, while I'm not about to embark on a large-scale consideration of magic in Middle-earth, we'll save that for a future video, I am going to focus today on one small aspect of it that I find quite compelling. That is, the way in which different conceptions of home give us an insight into Tolkien's understanding of magic. My thinking in this vein was inspired by a question asked by a student the very first time I taught my class on The Lord of the Rings. Why, the student wanted to know, are the Nazgul so useless at the start of the novel? Well, think about it. The Nazgul, or Ringwraiths, also known as the 9 mortal men doomed to die, the men whom Sauron seduced with rings of power and thus transformed them into terrifying, berobed and becowled entities of terror and malice. These beings are capable of freezing whole battalions of soldiers in their tracks with the mere sounds of their voices. Boromir reports as much to the Council of Elrond, recounting Gondor's defeat at the hands of Sauron's army. Though Gondor's army was outnumbered by Sauron's minions and their allied forces, he maintains that it was not by numbers that we were defeated. A power was there that we had not felt before. This power did not manifest in shot and steel, but in sheer terror. Some said that it could be seen like a great black horseman, a dark shadow under the moon. Wherever he came, madness filled our foes, but fear fell on our boldest, so that horse and man gave way and fled. We later see such debilitating fear at work in The Return of the King, as a Nazgul pursues Faramir's men to the gates of Minas Tirith. Men were breaking away, flying wild and witless here and there, flinging away their weapons, crying out in fear, falling to the ground. Later the Nazgul function as a simple weapon of terror. Out of sight and shot they flew, and yet were ever present, and their deadly voices rent the air. More unbearable they became, not less, at each new cry. At length even the stout-hearted would fling themselves on the ground, as the hidden menace passed over them, or they would stand letting their weapons fall from nerveless hands, while into their minds a blackness came, and they thought no more of war, but only of hiding, and of crawling, and of death. So, keeping this capacity for debilitating terror in mind, let's think about the Hobbit's first encounter with the Nazgul, who quite literally come sniffing around the Shire in the early chapters of the Fellowship of the Ring. Though Frodo had heard about the Ringwraiths from Gandalf in Chapter 2, he doesn't make the connection to the Black Riders, whom he and the other hobbits avoid and evade as they begin their journey. And while the Black Riders are certainly scary, they are perhaps more creepy than terrifying. Samwise Gamgee's father, the Gaffer, recounts speaking with one asking for Frodo by name. "Hissed at me, he did. It gave me quite the shudder." Now, quite the shudder is of a somewhat different order than the stout men of Gondor breaking ranks and fleeing. One assumes that the Nazgul wasn't making an active effort to freeze the Gaffer's heart in terror, but that raises a related question. Why wasn't he? Why all this slinking around? There can be no doubt the Nazgul sense they're closing in on Sauron's ring, and they are definitely pursuing the hobbits. But the hobbits have what seem in hindsight a fairly easy time eluding them. Then in Bree, when the wraiths actually attack, they are confused by the clever ruse of pillows and bolsters heaped under bedclothes to simulate sleeping hobbits. This was the crux of my student's question. Precisely how do these unearthly, undead vessels of dark magic get fooled by a trick that's just so Ferris Buellerian? There are a few ways to answer this question, not least of which is the simple fact that, at this point in the narrative, The Lord of the Rings hasn't quite left the world of The Hobbit. By which I mean, The Lord of the Rings started as a sequel to The Hobbit, but as Tolkien famously noted, the tale grew in the telling. It eventually shook off the children's story sensibility, but one way to read these early chapters, especially as evidenced by the travails in the Old Forest and the encounter with Tom Bombadil, is that Tolkien was still working within the idiom of Bilbo's adventure. There are more textually grounded answers. The ringwraiths are at this point being deliberately stealthy, they are less powerful during the day, or when acting singly or in twos and threes. So far from Mordor, their connection to Sauron is weakened. Indeed, in the passage from The Return of the King I cited earlier, Tolkien makes clear that a large part of this overwhelming force of terror projected by the Nazgul is due to Sauron's own proximity and increasing power. As the Dark Lord now grew and put forth his strength, so their voices, which uttered only his will and malice, were filled with evil and horror. But I propose another possibility, which is that the Nazgul's power is dramatically lessened by the Shire itself. That here, in Tolkien's idyllic, idealized figuration of 19th century English rural life, the magic of the Hobbit's homeland denudes the Wraith's abilities to bring their own dark magic to bear. That the Shire possesses a sort of magic is consonant with one of the most striking themes running through The Lord of the Rings, the way in which a given place gets imbued with the nature and character of its inhabitants. We see this most glaringly and perniciously with the way in which evil stains and poisons the land it inhabits. Mordor is a blasted hellscape of ash and cinder. The land to its northwest still bears the ghosts and scars of the cataclysmic war between Sauron and the Last Alliance at the end of the Second Age. We also see the processes of degradation at work, with Saruman's transformation of Isengard into an industrial pit, and the slow seeping of Mordor's influence into the land of Ithilien. And of course there is Mirkwood, formerly Greenwood the Great, which grows dark and strangling and giant spider-infested when Sauron takes up residence in its southern reaches in the guise of the Necromancer. By contrast, the places of respite we encounter during the quest, most notably Rivendell and Lothlorien, aren't just pleasant, but provide recuperative qualities to travelers in both body and soul. This sense is even conveyed in The Hobbit when they rest in Rivendell, described there as perfect, whether you liked food, or sleep, or work, or storytelling, or singing, or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Evil things did not come into that valley. Merely to be there, the Fellowship of the Ring adds, was a cure for weariness, fear, and sadness. Notably, these qualities do not disappear with the departure of the place's inhabitants. As the Fellowship journeys south, they arrive in a region of historical significance, whose history can still be felt. Gandalf notes, "We have reached the borders of the country that men call Hollin. Many elves lived here in happier days, when Eregion was its name. The company feels their spirits rise. There is a wholesome air about Hollin," Gandalf continues. "Much evil must befall a country before it wholly forgets the elves, if once they dwelt there." All of these examples display a certain kind of affect that goes deeper than the mere experience of a pleasant locale. Tolkien's characters feel it on something like a spiritual level, even as they feel it physically. In Hollin, in Rivendell, in Ithilien, they feel refreshed, healed, the opposite of the experience of Mordor or Mirkwood. In a world like Middle-earth, with such magical beings as Elrond and Galadriel, it makes sense that the strongholds of Rivendell and Lothlorien are magical bulwarks. Indeed, Gandalf tells Frodo as they sit in the House of Elrond, there is a power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor for a while. That much is perhaps unsurprising, but then the wizard adds, there is power too, of another kind, in the Shire. Of another kind. There goes Gandalf being cryptic again. But really, this is arguably just another example of Tolkien being vague about the nature of magic in Middle-earth. What power resides in the Shire? This much is never made clear by Tolkien, but I would suggest it's precisely the kind of magic that I've been discussing, the magic of home. It is not magic of the same order as found in Rivendell, or which still lingers in the land formerly known as Eregion, but it is a magic that is crucial to The Lord of the Rings, as it is the magic that succeeds where others fail. The Shire is an anomaly in the broader expanse of Middle-earth, which is otherwise identifiably based on medieval Europe. As Norman Cantor notes in his book Inventing the Middle Ages, Middle-earth is mostly a wild space containing comfortable pockets of momentarily quiet and enclosed country, embedded within war, threat of war, destruction of war, and memories of war. Tolkien's world is based in part on the way it was in France around 1450, after the 100 Years' War, or in France around 480, after the Germanic invasions. We see this in the Hobbit's first real experience of the wild, when Aragorn leads them from Bree off the main road, and really at all points in between the rare moments of refuge in places like Rivendell. But where Rivendell and Lothlorien are enchanted spaces, and Edoras and Minas Tirith are basically medieval castles protecting their surrounding feudal countryside, the Shire is of much more recent vintage. As Mark Atherton observes in his book There and Back Again, hobbits live in a world that resembles an idyllic version of England in about the year 1890. The Shire is essentially a nostalgic vision of rural English life, the hobbits themselves a fond depiction of a certain character of parochial Englishness. In the preface to The Fellowship of the Ring, under the heading Concerning Hobbits, Tolkien informs his readers that hobbits love peace and quiet and good tilled earth. A well-ordered and well-farmed countryside was their favorite haunt. They do not and did not understand or like machines more complicated than a forge bellows, a watermill, or a hand-loom, though they were skillful with tools. Laughter and eating and drinking, often and heartily, are among hobbits' favorite occupations, being fond of simple jests at all times and of 6 meals a day when they could get them. They are generous and not greedy, but contented and moderate, and this general sensibility meant that their customs and practices tended to remain unchanged for generations. We're privy in the first chapter of The Fellowship of the Ring to a number of gossipy conversations indicative of a parochial mindset, preoccupied with neighbors' behavior, suspicious of outsiders, and indeed suspicious of hobbits, like Bilbo, who are perceived as behaving in unusual ways. A recurring expression throughout The Lord of the Rings is Hobbit-Sense. The first time we hear it used is to express a parochial sentiment. Following Bilbo's departure, the wagging tongues around the Shire lament what they see as Gandalf's corruptive influence on Frodo. If only that dratted wizard will leave young Frodo alone, perhaps he'll settle down and grow some hobbit sense. Tolkien gives hobbits as a group a patina of silliness and unseriousness, which Frodo laments when he says, "There have been times when I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, and have felt that an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them." Gandalf speaks in similar terms, referring to all the charming, absurd, helpless, kind, jolly, stupid, bulgers, hornblowers, boffins, bracegirdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses. But this ostensible silliness and complacency becomes increasingly belied throughout The Lord of the Rings, as Frodo and his companions prove themselves startlingly tough and resilient, something Gandalf predicts when he notes how Gollum did not fade into wraithness under the ring's influence, but remained thin and tough still, retaining a little corner of his mind that was his own. Gollum, in this respect, had proved tougher than even one of the wise would have guessed, as a hobbit might. Hobbit-Sense, then, denotes both a physical and mental toughness, perhaps best illustrated by Sam Gamgee's capacity to resist the ring's temptation during his brief time bearing it. In that hour of trial, it was the love of his master that helped most to hold him firm, but also deep down in him lived still unconquered his plain hobbit sense. The contrast between their apparent silliness and deeper wisdom and hardiness underpins Tolkien's profoundly humane conception of hobbits, with the Shire, then, as the expression of hobbit sense written into a landscape. Its magic is not of an order with Rivendell, but as Gandalf says, a power of another kind. Not the power of the Valar and Elven rings, nor the power of nature unbridled, nor yet the malign industrial magic of Mordor, but something quieter, the magic of home, which lends strength to the hobbits as they journey. Frodo tells Gandalf, "I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again." So, why were the Nazgul so useless in the early chapters of The Lord of the Rings? Well, whatever malevolent magic they could muster, I like to think it was blunted by the collective magic of concentrated hobbit sense. Thanks for watching. You can find the full unedited essay of this video, along with bibliographical references and footnotes, on my Substack, The Magical Humanist.